It's a murder case that put the Valley on edge. The death of Allison Feldman, the 31-year-old U of A graduate found dead in her Scottsdale home. The case going cold for years before an arrest that marked a first here in the state. This is Arizona Crime Uncovered. I'm Ashley Holden. 10 years later, the case has yet to go to trial after a battle over DNA evidence reached the highest court in Arizona. I sat down with Allison's dad, reaching back into our archives to reflect on the case. With the trial date on the books, we're tracking the latest developments as the battle over that DNA may not be over yet. A true murder mystery casting a dark shadow on a normally quiet Scottsdale neighborhood.
This doesn't happen in Scottsdale. And this should never happen to anyone, especially Allison.
In 2015, the Scottsdale community didn't know what to do or what to think. Everyone trying to figure out why 31-year-old Allison Feldman was killed inside her own home. But when I sat down with her dad, Harley Feldman, 10 years later, I wanted to start further back with how Allison ended up here in the desert from Minnesota, landing at the University of Arizona.
She applied and got accepted, and we came down here for orientation, and she loved it.
Wow.
The next part of the story, though, is that Parents' Weekend is like the 6th weekend. And I know why it's scheduled then, because that's when the excitement about being in a new school, a new place is sort of over, and the reality of school is taking place. And so we came down, and she was struggling. Being away from home, new place, so forth. And so toward the end of the weekend, I said to her, you know, if you don't want to stay here, it's okay. I'd just like you to finish out the semester because we've already paid for the tuition and you should earn the credits and things. And you know, just that little pressure off, she stayed and loved Arizona from there on.
Yeah, graduated in 4 years, right?
Yes.
And then talk about her decision to move to the Valley.
Tucson was too small. And, you know, the city girl in her said, I'm going to move to Phoenix. And we have a cousin here. And she stayed with the cousin for about 4 weeks and found an apartment and never came home.
In the Valley, Allison ultimately getting a job in medical device sales, finding a boyfriend, and moving into her Scottsdale home. Harley feels he and his wife were both blessed with final, unexpected trips to see Allison.
So my wife was a flight attendant at that time, and she had a trip to Montreal, and whenever she had 30 hours somewhere, I would go with her. And I flew for free because she worked for the airlines. And so we come back into Minneapolis on Christmas morning from Montreal, and my wife still has 2 days on her trip. And she says to me, why don't you see if you can go visit Allison in Phoenix? And right across the hall is the flight to Phoenix. And I go over there and I check in, and I'm 8th on the standby list, thinking, you're just going to go home? And 8 no-shows. So I got on the flight and came to Phoenix, spent 2 days with Allison. And this was 2 months before she was murdered.
And then your wife also got to see her just days before.
Yes. My wife got a trip to Phoenix, which never happened for her because she wasn't high enough in seniority. So we still don't know how she got this trip. So she flies into Phoenix on the 13th, and Allison and she agreed to have breakfast together on Valentine's Day.
Wow.
And so they did near the ASU, and had a great time, and flew out of here, and 3 days later she was gone.
I want you to take me back to February 17th, and that would have been 2015. What do you remember from that day?
I talked to Allison about 10 o'clock at night, Minnesota time. And because we talked almost every day. And then I tried to text her, and this is sort of the early days of cell phones, and the text didn't go through, but I didn't think anything of it. But the next morning, we tried to call her, and her phone was off. the salespeople may not answer the phone, but it's never off.
Yeah.
And so right away we knew it just didn't feel right. And I tried to get a hold of her all day, and I couldn't. So I had the Scottsdale police, I called them and I said, would you do a well check on the house? Because something's not right. Meanwhile, my wife has a trip to New York. And I said, maybe you shouldn't go. And she said, I'd rather go and maybe keep my mind off, something that's going wrong. Yeah. And about 10 minutes after the plane took off, I got a phone call from the Scottsdale detective. And he said, are you driving? And I said, yes. And he said, pull off the road. Mm-hmm. And so I knew what was coming next. Yeah. Meanwhile, my wife's in the air, and probably the longest 2 hours of my life waiting for her to arrive in New York. And she decided to work coach. She usually worked first class, but worked coach because then she could be in the back of the plane and call me when the plane landed. So she lands in New York and calls me, and I tell her, and she started screaming. Passengers still on the plane. It hit her so badly that they had to take her to the hospital.
Allison's boyfriend finding the 31-year-old dead in her home with head trauma and other injuries. Court documents say she was nude and her body smelled of bleach.
Was it hard, and if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, for her boyfriend to grapple with this? Because he was the one who found her, is that right?
Yeah, it was really hard. In fact, a neighbor told me that he went into the house 10 minutes before the Scottsdale police, and he's the one who discovered her. And she told me he came out and sat on the sidewalk and just wailed.
Neighbors left terrified, and the push for justice in the case was only just beginning.
It's scary that you don't know exactly what happened, and it's just right around the corner.
We're hoping that it's not a random act of somebody that's in the neighborhood that's just walking into homes.
In the days and weeks that followed Allison Feldman's murder, ABC15 going to multiple community meetings led by police.
I just didn't think anything like that would happen here.
Investigators say that the attacker took Feldman's Tiffany bracelet, her iPhone 6, and credit cards from her home. Police also say that the attacker might live in the area. That said, police don't know who he is or whether or not he knew the victim. Why is it a he, a him? Police say they do have physical evidence.
Reporters speaking with Allison's family as they made trips to the valley.
It's really hard when you say such a sweet girl, I'd call her a perfect child, and she's gone. So we can't figure out why this happened to her.
It's not like watching CSI that in an hour they solve the crime. They have the person's DNA, but there's no match.
What were those first few months like? Because it was just a very, I know this case was pretty much cold for years.
So the first, Scottsdale police asked if we would keep her body in the house while they did some investigative work. So we did for 5 days. And they got some clues about what might have happened, but sort of didn't know who the perpetrator was.
The Feldman family and Allison's friends over the years attending memorials, pushing for answers in her case.
Allison was the most wonderful, loving child you'd ever want to meet.
We want him to turn himself in and not be out on the street while she's laying in a grave.
3 years would pass with no arrests, but a first for Arizona would help lead Scottsdale police to a suspect: the use of familial DNA, pointing police to a close relative.
Plus, a huge break in a cold case. Police make an arrest in a Scottsdale woman's murder.
It's probably one of the biggest advancements in my time and Chief Rodbell's time in law enforcement.
Police say the suspect, 41-year-old Ian Mitchum, left a piece of himself at the very violent crime scene.
The close match, Mitchum's brother, who was already behind bars. At the time, police using a blood sample from a previous 2015 DUI arrest to connect Mitchum to the murder scene.
Mitchum was arrested right outside the deli where he worked for a little more than a year in North Phoenix. His co-workers watching it all.
Were you guys shocked then when you saw him
out
here?
Of course. We didn't know what was going on. We went out and talked to the police. Can't believe it.
So I got a call. I was in Orlando at a trade show, and the assistant chief said to me, "We know who it is, and we're going to arrest him tomorrow." And they did. I didn't know who it was. And then I got a phone call from the Scottsdale City Jail, and this was the next day, said to me they're going to move him to the Maricopa County Jail. I had a right to be there. And I said, well, I can't. I'm in Orlando. And I said, what else can I do? And she said, well, you can write a victim impact statement.
Okay, sir, state your name and date of birth.
Ian Mitchum, October 6, 75.
The judge that first saw Mitchum at his initial court appearance saying this.
And for the record, I did receive and review a statement from the alleged victim's father, and I did consider that prior to coming into court. I am going to set a $5 million cash bond.
What was that feeling like to get that call, to hear that read? I mean, after all that time.
I just sat back in the chair and relaxed. Yeah. And I thought, well, now we'll have some resolution to the case.
But Harley didn't know the battle that was around the corner and the new hurdles he and his family would have to face inside a courtroom. It was the night that changed everything for the Feldman family. Mitchum has pleaded not guilty. Court documents say he denied knowing or being at Allison's home, telling police in the months surrounding the murder he had an alcohol problem. Years later, with the trial date approaching, a new twist. The court case put on pause as the battle over that key DNA evidence started to unfold.
You start to think, well, maybe we'll never get there.
A stunning turn of events in a Valley murder case. Allison Feldman was killed in Scottsdale back in 2015, and for years there were no arrests in this case. And then in 2018, Ian Mitchum, a deli worker, was arrested after police say DNA testing linked him to the killing. But a judge has just tossed out the DNA sample in this case, saying it can't be used as evidence.
As a trial date approached for the Feldman family, that key DNA evidence thrown out by a Maricopa County Superior Court judge in early 2023.
It was right before trial, right?
Yes.
The original. Yep. So what was that feeling like for your family being so close to that coming?
It was kind of stunning because we were ready for trial. They already talked about how many jurors they were going to have to interview and so forth. And all that stopped. And then I learned about the appeal process, and you start to think, well, maybe we'll never get there, especially with all the appeals we had to go through.
Mitchum's attorneys challenging the use of that DNA from the unrelated DUI, saying police did the testing without a warrant, and the sample shouldn't have been available in the first place. According to court records, Mitchum had signed documentation saying the blood would be destroyed after 90 days, but it wasn't. The decision first moved to the Arizona Court of Appeals, ABC15 breaking the news when a decision was reached in August 2023.
We want to get right over to Ashley Holden. And Ashley, you're tracking new developments in the Allison Feldman case.
The State Court of Appeals now ruling a key piece of DNA evidence can be used in a case that's gripped the Valley.
Could you have ever expected that this would be where we're at 10 years later?
No. The first objection was on the DNA that was taken on a DUI arrest. The first judge agreed with them. Yeah. So we went to the Arizona Court of Appeals, and we won that case to have that DNA as part of this case. And they appealed that, and then we went to the Arizona Supreme Court.
Over 9 years of fighting, did you ever think you'd be in the Arizona Supreme Court?
Never.
Harley walking up the steps of the highest court in Arizona in September 2024, not knowing what would happen next. Both sides taking rapid-fire questions from the justices, starting with Mitchum's team.
Evidence discovery cannot depend on speculation. And that's precisely why Judge Whitehead at the trial court said that the state had not fulfilled its burden to prove inevitable discovery.
If they want to try to do this investigation properly, they can try to do it, but they've done it poorly up until now, and the evidence that they've collected is tainted.
prosecutors ultimately saying Mitchum is a twice convicted felon and his DNA would have inevitably been put in a criminal database.
And so it's form over function to say, well, they didn't retake the sample to develop the profile that's in the database. I could take another sample today, and it will result in the same profile.
With the DNA battle lasting close to 2 years, Harley and his wife moving to the Valley, even living in Allison's home before building their own.
I do this for her. The reason we moved to Arizona was so that we'd be close to the courts. And it's too hard to do this by Zoom, and I don't feel that I can participate the same way.
After months of waiting, in December 2024, the state Supreme Court saying that while the warrantless search did violate Mitchum's Fourth Amendment rights, the DNA could be used in court, and agreed that inevitably, as a felon, his DNA would have been obtained lawfully.
All right, sir, can I have your name and date of birth, please? Ian Mitchum, October 6, 75.
In January of this year, a new trial date set for October 2025. But Mitchum's attorney has already filed a request with the U.S. Supreme Court challenging the Arizona justice's interpretation of inevitable discovery.
If they don't accept the case, then they'll make that decision fairly quickly. If they accept the case, then that changes everything.
What would that feeling be like, gearing up for another battle? I mean, I'm assuming you'd fly to D.C.
Probably. I mean, there'll be some point in time that the case is heard, and I would be there for it.
As they wait to see what will happen next, Harley serves in Allison's honor through the Parents of Murdered Children organization.
I think it's so admirable that you serve in your own way and your wife also serves in her own way, and that helps you guys.
It does. If we can, I mean, losing a child is so traumatic for any family. If we can help them move along with their life, I mean, it can't place the child, then that helps both of us. When you lose a child, you lose your future. Allison will never be married, never have children, will never have grandchildren with her. And that's the part of life that everybody looks forward to. You know, we have grandkids with our other daughter. We'd love to have grandkids with Allison,
yeah,
but we won't. And that's the hard reality of losing a child.
10 years later, what do you think Allison would tell you today?
Keep moving. She's just, you know, that's who she was. And she would say, I know this is all negative, but you have to stay together as a family and keep together and move on with your life.
Yeah.
I mean, I could hear her say that today. I don't know that it'll ever be done until there's a final verdict.
Yeah.
I try not to think about that. I just take this one step at a time, and so when the trial comes, we'll see what happens.
The Maricopa County Attorney's Office is seeking the death penalty in Mitchum's case. ABC15 did reach out to his attorney to see if they would do an interview or provide a comment, but they declined. We will cover all the developments with where the case goes next here on Arizona Crime Uncovered. Thank you for watching Arizona Crime Uncovered. We're working to bring awareness to crimes where victims are still awaiting justice and also provide an in-depth look at cases still unfolding. Each episode breaks down a timeline of the case, where it stands now, and if any help is needed from the community. You can watch on ABC15.com, the ABC15 mobile app, Roku, YouTube, or any of your other streaming platforms.